All right. Good evening. Good to see all of you. Good to see you, Gloria. Toby, your computer's working, Baruch Hashem. Good to see you. And okay, should only be good, God willing. Looks like Melissa's on, and Judd is attempting to connect to the audio. Okay, so you might be hearing me a little bit clearer than usual because I actually had set up my whole operation here at the shul earlier. I got to interview Rabbi Yaakov Bender this afternoon
Mm.
from Yeshiva Darchei Torah. So that will for the podcast. So that, God willing, will be airing tomorrow. And so I have my fancy microphone and everything set up here, so I figured may as well use it for the Gemara Shir as well, right? You guys get some clarity. It's just like it's usually I don't schlep this around with me. It's a whole ganze Zach. I'm still using some of the Yiddishisms because I was just talking to Bender, as you can see. I have to code switch. That's what they call it these days. I have to code switch. Okay. So we are on Lameches Amid Aleph on 38a. Okay, we are at the Mishnah. We're at the Mishnah on the top of Lameches Amid Aleph. Shouldn't be too hard to find. Again, Lameches Amid Aleph, 38a, Mishnah on the top. Pretty confident that it is still the first page in the art scroll for those using it. Okay, all set? Here we go. Misha Baba Derek Lulav Litol. So let's say you're coming back from a trip, you get home, and you do not have a chance yet to shake the lulav, or to take the lulav at the very least. Sorry, litol yitol al shulchano. When you get home, you take the lulav, even if you're at your table eating. Lo natal shachris, if you didn't take it in the morning, if you didn't do it in the morning when in the morning, and also when you daven shacharis, yitol bein arbaim, you could take later in the afternoon. Shechol hayom kasher lulula, because it's one of those mitzvos which, as long as you do it any time during the day, it is still legitimate. So that's the general principle. Okay, Toby, you're muted, but it looks like you're trying to say something.
I'm sorry, you said 38A?
Yeah, in
Why did
Maseches Sukkah.
Yeah, I'm there.
The first Mishnah on the top. There's two Mishnayos. You're on the first one.
I'm on a 38A. Oh, A1. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay, now I'm gonna turn off so I don't cough.
Oh, okay. All right. So we are oriented. So that was the Mishnah. The Mishnah basically says you should take the lulav when you get the first stop, when you get the first opportunity. Seemingly, the Gemara will get into that. And if you neglected to take the lulav earlier, you could do it later in the day. So that's true for many mitzvos. Davening Musaf has that, even though it has an ideal time. Think about shofar. Think about, I was about to say lulav. That was the example we just said. Tefillin. So there's other examples like that. Okay, so now into the Gemara. Amrit notlal shulchano lememra demafsik. So the way that one would probably read the Mishnah, the Gemara is saying, is that when it tells you to take the lulav at the table, that sounds like you're in the middle of your meal and you say, Oy vey, it's Sukkot. I'm sitting in the Sukkah, but I forgot to take the lulav earlier today. So it sounds like you should abruptly pause your Suda and take the lulav. Or a mini, but this seems to be contradicted by a separate teaching, which is a Bryce that's in Masechet Shabbos. It tells us that if you started your meal, you don't need to pause it. So if we look at Rashi, Rashi explains this is Gabe Tfilas Mincha. It's saying is that if you're in the middle of your meal and it's Mincha time and you didn't daven Mincha yet, you don't need to pause your meal in order to daven Mincha. So we seem to have a contradiction here. Our Mishnah regarding the mitzvah of lulav says you have to abruptly end, whereas the mitzvah of davening mincha, you don't need to abruptly end or pause your suda in order to daven mincha. Can wait till you're done. So I don't get it. Do I have to pause my suda for a mitzvah or do I not have to? So Rav Safra says, Lo kasha, here's how we resolve it. It just depends on whether you're running out of time. If your meal is playing it close to Shkia, it's playing close to sunset, then you would be required to pause your meal lest you run out of time. So that is the case in our Mishnah. You're running out of time to take the lulav. Whereas the case in Shabbos saying is you have a whole afternoon at daven mincha. So you know what? You don't have to pause your suda. Now halacha lemaisa, I think one is generally, the way you're not supposed to really have meals before davening once it's time for davening. So the trick is that you can set an alarm for yourself. And that way, as long as you have an alarm that will remind you to daven later, then we don't have a concern. Okay. However, Rava says, Amar Rava, my kushya, Dilma Hadarais Adar Rabbanan. Rava says, no, there's a more obvious distinction over here. Davening mincha is a rabbinical obligation. Taking the arba minim, taking the four species, is a biblical obligation. So I can understand for a biblical obligation, drop everything you're doing, stop your meal, and take the arba minim. Whereas davening mincha, as important as it is a rabbinical level obligation. So maybe I wouldn't tell you to drop everything you're doing for a rabbinical level obligation. So Rav is not just simply resolving the contradiction. Rav is saying is that there isn't even a contradiction to begin with, right? Sometimes the answer is so good. What was the kasha? What was the question to begin with? Elam Rava. Rava says, no, we don't need to go traveling all the way over to Masechet Shabbos to find an issue with our Mishnah, but we have rather an internal contradiction. Elam Rava. Kasha hakasha. This is what should be bothering you. The Mishnah first tells us when you get home, take the lulav even at your table. Alma de mafsik. The implication there is that you pause your meal to take the lulav. But then the Mishnah continues, Tani, lo natal shachar, sito bein arbayim. If you didn't take it in the morning, you could take it later in the afternoon. Alma lo mafsik. That sounds like, as long as you get it done sometime during the day, no need to pause your meal. So we have an internal contradiction in our Mishnah. And it was that internal contradiction that Rav Safra was coming to resolve. Now we plug him in. Amar Rav Safra, lo kasha, had ikashus bayom, had lekashus bayom. So the Reish and the Seifa, the first part of the Mishnah, the second part of the Mishnah are dealing with two different scenarios. In a scenario where you have no time left, pause your meal, take the lulav right away. But when you do have time, you don't need to pause your meal in order to take the arba minim. That is Rava's approach. Rava says the issue is internally, and that is how Rav Safra comes along and reconciles it. Amar Rav Zera, my kushya. No. Dilma mivsa lav suke vilo pasik yitol ben arbaim shechalim kasher lulav. Now he's basically taking a page out of Rava's rule book. He's saying, Rava, that's such an easy question to resolve. It's not even a question. The Mishnah is telling us there's a mitzvah. Ideally, you should pause your meal to take the lulav. In the event you neglected to do the ideal thing and pause your meal immediately, stop in your tracks and take the arba minim, b'di'evad, as long as the day has not ended, you still have a chance to fulfill the mitzvah. So that's just like the pashut shot, obvious reading of the Mishnah, and there isn't even a question to begin with from the outset. El Rav Zera. So Rav Zera says, rather, the question from the contradiction between Masechet Shabbos and our Mishnah is actually the real question here, like we suspected initially. And now, just to deal with to preempt Rava's retort, with a kashalach hadarais adarban. Now you're going to say again, lulav's doraisa, davening mincha is derabanan. Why would I think that's a contradiction? Which day of Sukkot is it doraisa that you're obligated to take the arba minim? The first day of Sukkot. Very good, Toby. I saw that. The first day of Sukkot. And for us in Chutz La'aretz, well, even in Chutz La'aretz, actually, it's still not D'oraisa because it's only Seika Diyoma. We do that Midrabanan. So Haka B'Yom Tov Sheni Dirabanan Askinan. This is talking about the second day, which is Dirabanan. And he actually, how do we know that? He's not just pulling it out of thin air. He says if you read the Mishnah, you can understand that's not talking about the first day of Sukkot. Dekanami, Miktani, Misha, Baba, Derech, they be other lulav. What does the Mishnah say? Someone who comes back from a journey. But if we're talking about on Yom Tov itself, people aren't traveling on Yom Tov Rishon on the first day. People are traveling on Chol HaMoed. You take a Chol HaMoed trip. we'll do it in a future shiur coming up soon about whether one is allowed to schedule a Chol Moed trip where they know there won't be a sukkah for them along the way. We'll do it as a shiur, God willing, coming up outside this context. So here we actually now have a great stira. Minchas derabanan and taking arba minim. The rest of the dates of Yom Tov is also derabanan. Yet for arba minim, I have to pause my meal, and yet for mincha, I don't have to pause my meal. What is the reconciliation? How do we resolve this? Now we plug in Rosafra. We did originally. It's just a matter of, do you have time or not? If you have time, you don't need to pause. If you're out of time, you do need to pause. That is the Gemara there. I should point out, I went through this more carefully last week, and now I realize I should have done better chazara, admittedly. But I was when I was in the Heilige Woodburn, New York, the Svarm store over there in the Holy Land. The Svarm store there had a 20% off everything because he didn't want to schlep everything back down to, I don't know, Brooklyn or wherever he is during the year. So there was a clearance sale. So I got myself the Dibros Moshe, which is Moshe Feinstein on Sukkah. We usually hear about Igros Moshe, which are his responsa. But he also, in fact, actually, I read in the Sefer Darchi Moshe that he said that to him, the Dibros Moshe was more significant than the Igros Moshe. We think of Moshe most iconically for his responsa, for his halachic practical rulings, which are revolutionary. But for him, at his core, he was Rosh Yeshiva. And his Talmudic analysis was what he really held above all else. I'll add on my own piece that I think part of what makes his Chuvos so remarkable is that he uses his creative Talmudic analysis to reach really fascinating conclusions. So that's a little bit of a sidebar there. So anyway, I'll give you some of the pieces here. He brings up the Tosos from that Gemara. I think it's the same Gemara in Shabbos there. And Tosos basically asks the following question, or not, makes an observation. In the case of our Mishnah, so it sounds like from the conclusion of the Gemara that as long as you have time, you don't need to pause your Suda. But the question is, let's say there's different scenarios we can envision here. Maybe the guy didn't have a lulav to begin with, and someone only brought him a lulav while he was in middle of the Suda. So Tos is basically there is trying to figure out if you started your meal on permissible grounds, meaning you did not have a lulav in your possession, you thought the shtetl was fresh out of lulavim, so since you started your meal permissibly, so then you wouldn't be obligated to pause your meal. Or maybe actually the way we should understand this is that no, the person actually had a lulav already. And in fact, this is where Moshe comes in and explains, even if you don't physically have a lulav, from the onset of Yom Tov, you are fundamentally, in principle, obligated in the mitzvah lulav, even if you're not in physical possession of one. And nonetheless, the Mishnah still tells us that if you have time, you don't need to pause. So that means that even if you started your meal seemingly impermissibly, even though you shouldn't have done it, we still won't make you pause the meal so long as you have enough time during the day. So that's just an interesting point over there. Ayin Sham in Tosos. Back to our feature presentation. So next Mishnah, right? We get two Mishnahs in tonight. Look at that, two for the price of one, my friends. This is a very important Mishnah, not just for Sukkah really, but actually for brachos in general. We're now going to be pivoting and talking about brachos and talking about right, because we talked about Hallel 2 Mishnayos ago. I think we talked about Hallel, right? Yes, we did mention Hallel because we were talking about the Na'anuim. So we're picking it up over here. Misha haya eved isha o katan makranoso ona acharehem. So this is talking about from the perspective of a man. If a man does not know how to read the brachos, doesn't know how to read Hallel, to be more specific, so a woman or child who knows the Nusach, right? They didn't have Siddurim back then. So if you have a child or a woman who memorized it, so then they can recite it, and he should just, in an undertone, recite after them. Mashahin Omrim. All right. Sorry. Where I see. Magraso Onach Rehen, Mashahin Omrin, Vitavalo Meira. But he is cursed. He should be cursed for this. Why should he be cursed? Because it was incumbent upon him to learn the nusach. He shouldn't have to rely on his wife or on his children to read it for him. He should learn the nusach himself. However, imay gadol makroso ona achrov halaluka. So, however, if there is an adult male who is reading the Hallel, who shares the same level of obligation as him, then you don't actually have to recite Hallel in an undertone, but you can actually be Yotze, as long as both of them have Kavana, by listening to the Chazan, and it operates on the principle of Shomea Ka'ona, that when you hear someone read something, it's like you're doing it yourself. This is how many things operate. That's how, not to get into the weeds, arguably that's how Megillah operates. That's how, by the way, you know how we have the Chaz's repetition of Shemona Esrei, Chazor Zashatz? Well, back in the day, the way it really worked was that most people didn't know Shemona Esrei. So the Chazan would say it out loud, and you would listen, and it would be as if you are saying the words by listening and saying Amen. Or in the case of Hallel, giving a Hallelujah at the end. So that's what you're supposed, and the Amen or Haluka actually is not necessarily Ma'akev. If you neglect to say it, you might still be Yotze anyway. Latter part of the mission now for the Seifa. Malkum Shnago Lichvo Yichvo Livsho Yivshot Levarech Yivarech Hakol Kamina Kamadina. This is a very important source for the notion of what's called Mina Kamakom, of following the custom of where you find yourself. So even though we have things kind of set in our Sidurim, there were many minhagim, and we'll talk about this in a future share, I believe, about which psukim and Hallel you repeat, which ones you don't repeat, which blessings are said, which aren't, and there's a lot of variance, and everything goes based on the minhag of that location. We'll talk about that more in a future share, Mir Tzeshem. Just to wrap up the Gemara for this evening, Tanar Rabbanan. In truth, actually, unlike what it says in our mission, the Brisa says here that a child, a servant, or a woman can recite a bracha for the man of the household, the father / master / husband. But again, they should be cursed for having to resort to that. What's interesting here, actually, let me just read on to the next Amud, and then I'll come back to this point. Amar Rabba, just to get us on to the next page. There's a lot you can learn from the way Hallel is done even today, and we'll talk about what those are next week, just to get us on to the next Amud. Now, turning back to Lameches Amud Aleph. So what's interesting here is that it seems that we're saying that a child could be motzi, an adult, in Birchas Hamazon it's talking about, in benching. So benching, at least the beginning of it, is deoraisa, is biblically mandated. But the issue is, it's not clear whether women are also biblically mandated in benching, and certainly a child is not biblically mandated in benching. So how is it possible that a child could say Birchas Hamazon, and then an adult not reading with him, but listening would be Yotze with him? You need someone of equal or greater level obligation to be motzi someone else. So Rashi points out the Gemara in Brachos, which says, well, there's two levels of obligation in terms of benching. On a rabbinical level, if I have the volume of a kizayis, of an olive, I'm obligated to bench. But biblically, I have to have kidei sevia. It says, v'achalta v'savata uveirachta. That you'll eat, you will be sated, I always mix it up, whatever it is, and then you will bless God. So on a biblical level, it's not enough just to have the volume of an olive, but you have to be able to pat your stomach after and say, that was a good Suda right there. So let's do some math. The adult who only eats an olive, a volume of an olive, a kazais, is only obligated to recite benching midrabanan. A child who eats a kidei sevilla is only, they had a biblical amount, but they're just fundamentally only obligated rabbinically. Now they're on the same level. Let the child who only has, right, if the child ate only the volume of an olive, it'd be trey d'Rabbanan. A, he's fundamentally only obligated benching d'Rabbanan, and B, he only had a shear d'Rabbanan. But if he has a shear d'Oraisa, could they see, he can pat his stomach and say, great meal, he only has one d'Rabbanan. And one d'Rabbanan is equal level categorically to his father, who also is only obligated to Rabbanan, not because he's fundamentally only obligated to Rabbanan. He's chayiv in benching Doraisa, but because he only had the volume of an olive, it's only one to Rabbanan. So the lashon is in Rashi, Atzi midrabanan umafik midrabanan. Let one guy who's dirabanan come and be motzi the other dirabanan. But you know what's fascinating about this? Who is obligated in educating their child in chinuch? Certainly remember we did this all the way back at the beginning of the Masech. Remember we talked about Hilni Hamalka? Remember Rabbi Huda was trying to prove that she sat in a sukkah and the dimensions was above 20 amos or whatever it was. And basically we talked about the mitzvah chinuch. There's a whole discussion whether Hilni Hamalka as a mother is obligated in mitzvah chinuch. But okay, here the implication is that a child is responsible rabbinically for his own or her own, in fact, chinuch. And this is a fascinating idea because the rabbis are telling children that they're obligated to do mitzvos. But you're only obligated to listen to the rabbis because it says in Torah lo sasor, and they get their power from the pasuk. But children are not chayiv to follow deoraisas until they're bar and bas mitzvah. So it's a little circular. So Rochana Watchman addresses this. He says, even absent strict strict mitzvos and halacha, there's this idea of like the Ratzon Torah and Ratzon Chachamim, and they're still obligated. So I have to look back at that piece, but it's important. Tosos, by the way, deals with this question as well. Tosos brings up the Tosefta. The Tosefta is in Brachos. It's a brisa there. And it teaches, this is the one on the bottom of the Amud, it says that a list of different people, women included, cannot be motzi others in terms of their obligation of Birchas Hamazon. And they could only do it maybe when they have a shir doraisa. But basically the point is, without getting too much into the weeds, Tosos tells us, so basically, there's a few instances where it says that a woman could be motzi a man in birchas hamazon, like we just saw. But we said, well, maybe because she ate a shir doraisa and he only ate a shir dorabbanan, so they're on equal footing. That might be true. Maybe I can't prove positively that women are I can't prove for sure that women are not obligated to Oraisa, but I also can't prove it the other way. Maybe women are obligated to Oraisa. I don't have a proof in either direction. And you might think to say, oh, well, maybe the fact that women aren't counted toward a mezumah, toward a zimun, maybe that's a proof that they're not obligated to Oraisa. But Tosas, no, that's not a good proof either, because why is it that women don't combine for zimun? So, or why is the man lead the zimun there? So this is very politically incorrect. So you don't want to hear saying politically incorrect. Close your ears. Shiny ish the chashiv tvei, because a man leading it is more chashiv. Or alternatively, mishum derabim zila behu milsa, because it's what we call in Yiddish, it's pasnish. It's not appropriate for the woman to be leading it in the presence in public. By the way, he connects us to a topic in Megillah we did a while. Remember Maseches Megillah way back when? We talked about how women are obligated in reading Megillah. So he asked, wait a minute, so why can't a woman lead Megillah reading? So some believe that women have fundamentally different obligation than men. But the Bahag, the Baal Halachis Gedolah says, no, fundamentally, men and women have the same level of obligation to read Megillah. But the Ein Nashim Otzios Aram Di Chavas Megillah, but women don't do it. Why? Tosas understands the Bahag's reasoning is because Zila Behu Milsa. It's not appropriate for it to be done. So anyway, that's Tosos over there. Toby, you look like you have something to say on the matter.
I was just going to say with the benching, I think maybe it's just the practicality that women are usually in the kitchen when the benching is going on. They're cleaning up, they're starting to wash the dishes, so they're just not.
Want to hear something remarkable?
What?
Want to hear something remarkable? I came by a tshuva from Ramosha Feinstein about this topic, and he actually castigates men who will not wait for the women to come for benching. he
Oh,
actually goes through this. And he's like, you might say, she's like busy cleaning. I forgot the example, like in the kitchen or doing something another. And like, all right, who cares? He's like, no, women have an obligation to join in the Zeman. Now, he doesn't say women should lead the Zeman to President Men, but he says, you think you're so from not including the women. No, you should be waiting for the women to come to the table. So he actually castigates it. So I'm planning, it's on my docket to do Rav Moshe has a tshuva on feminism, and I kind of want to use that as a springboard to talk about Rav Moshe and important tshuvas related to women in general. And I think that is like the foil that I'm going to use to show that it doesn't mean he wasn't machshiv women. Like he actually valued their halachic participation, just in a traditional format. So only because you bring that up, I decided I would share that with you. It's I saw that shuva, I was like, whoa, this is coming from a mainstream guddle, no less. All right. Anyway, I think we have Tehillim and Mishnah in 5 minutes, so you could grab yourself a no, whatever you have at this hour. Yeah, I think
what
so.
are you doing it at
45, 50.
7:05 is Tehillim and then 50 is Mishnah?
I think so. So everyone can catch a breath, and I'll be back on Rabbi Cohen's account with that soon. All right. If I don't see you for Mishnah, then wishing you all a wonderful Shabbos. Take care.